We are back, we are in the space, we are ready to go for an awesome session now to take us through to lunchtime. The third impact area we're going to explore as part of BioHeritage's conference is called TIAKI Protect. The impact area focuses, of course, on making New Zealand's biosecurity system world-class. So today we're going to learn about some of the discovery science and new tools, new approaches and new innovations as well. Now remember, you can use your app to ask any questions and direct replies work inside there as well. So we look at how these are integrated with existing knowledge about controlling or eradicating threats. Also, how they can be implemented, adopted, and scaled out as well. So we have 9 talks this morning, including one which introduces us to the games that can be played and tried at lunchtime as well. They are being set up, so that's why we had to hustle you through that short period of restoration in terms of kai. So after lunch, we have a keynote about the prospect of rakiura being the first of our motu to gain predator-free status. We also have a panel discussion on the TIAKI theme and a very special video featuring predator-free leader, the late Sir Rob Fenwick, followed by a wonderful and exciting update which will no doubt leave us all quite inspired. Now, DOC is the sponsor of Crazy and Ambitious 4's TIAKI session this morning, which goes into the early afternoon. The Department of Conservation, Te Papa Atawhai, is the lead agency in Aotearoa, New Zealand for biodiversity conservation, and its purpose is to ensure that Papa Tuanuku thrives. Kia ora tātou. So we go into our first session in terms of TIAKI talks, and we hear from John Kean from AgResearch, a values-based biosecurity risk assessment framework, and this is what John will be speaking to. Kia ora, nau mai, whakapiri mai. Welcome.
Kia ora tātou, ko John Kean taku ingoa, and I'm going to introduce the theme of biosecurity. We've heard a lot about post-border protection and restoration and so on in this conference. Now we're thinking a little bit pre-border, and for me it's a bit like the trade and tourism are a bit like a giant bridge that joins our remote location to the rest of the world. Biosecurity is essentially around what do we let come through across that bridge and what do we try and prevent. So we were given 3 major objectives by the challenge around fostering greater participation in the border biosecurity system, considering a more holistic range of values rather than just the economics that tend to get considered, and coming up with a risk assessment and management framework that empowers mana whenua and other key participants and can really help to drive better decisions in a more robust way. We have a very wide and good-looking team, as you can see. I'd just like to point out the diversity here, including independent researchers as well as CRIs and universities. We have sponsored 6 students, 1 PhD and 5 masters. The PhD was co-sponsored with NRT3. Thank you, NRT3, for helping. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those students shortly. And we have 30% Māori researchers in our team. I'd also like to introduce this astoundingly good-looking chap. This is William Boucher, and you'll hear more about him later. This is a guy that we should know more about, and you'll find out why soon. And yes, he was a stripper. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a risk assessment framework as a starting point for discussion. It might be a little technical, but don't worry, I'll guide you through the slide, so don't freak out when you see it. So this is a risk assessment framework. The components are, we have the hazard. These are the things that can cause harm, and this is represented by the spark there. Exposure, that's how they get here and to cause that harm, that's the fuse. Consequences, of course, is the bomb. And what we really care about is my teddy. The things that are vulnerable to these consequences. And so this is a really simple way to understand risk. And it's useful because we can use the same framework to think about how we manage risk. So we can manage the exposure, we can try and cut off those pathways. That's what the MPI staff at the borders are trying to do. We can try and minimise the consequences. That's not always as easy. So instead, we can try and protect the things that we care about. Now, one of the first things that we did when we started this project 4 years ago, Melanie Newfield, who you heard from yesterday, and my co-lead Christine Reid, who's around somewhere, put your hand up, Christine, over the back there. They reviewed the current frameworks that are out there for making biosecurity risk-based decisions, and you can see mine's in the middle there. There's a lot of them. They then interviewed people within the system at regional, local and central government, as well as NGOs and other groups who are making biosecurity decisions based on risk, and asked what frameworks are they using. The answer was, apart from a few very particular exceptions, not using any of them really. There's a whole range of these frameworks out there, but they're not being widely used for biosecurity decision making. Something else that came out of that was the fact that trust is very central to these, and that decision makers are trying to consider a wide range of values, but the range of values that are being considered in different circumstances are quite different. So one of the first things we did was try to bring together the values that are being considered in these decisions, and both from sort of Crown sources and Pākehā sources, as well as Te Ao Māori sources. Now, I'm not going to dwell on those because there is a handout at the back that you can look at. We decided that it was more about how you make a decision than how you evaluate risk, and how can we support good biosecurity decision making, and we heard from Melanie yesterday on that, so I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but again there is a handout at the back if you want to go through the 13 key things that she discovered from talking to decision makers over a wide range of contexts, including many Māori decision makers. So a key question is how you value the environment, and this is something that we're all struggling with. How do you encapsulate the value of the environment into a form where decision makers who often aren't in the environment as we think about it can comprehend and can take into account? So there are different kinds of values. The easiest ones are the instrumental values, things that we can actually measure in dollars, because dollars are easy to evaluate against dollars. However, relational values and intrinsic values are really hard to weigh up against dollars, and costs are often in dollars. So that's a big challenge. So one way that you can tackle that is to ask people what certain outcomes are worth to them in terms of dollars, or in terms of their willingness to volunteer time. So this time component is a new thing that has not been done before. The willingness to pay approach is quite well established, but we've also asked about 600 and something New Zealand households what they would be willing to pay in volunteer time to achieve different conservation outcomes for the Ngāhere. I'm not going to go through the details because we're still analysing those data. Communication of that risk is quite important as well, and we've had two master's students through University of Canterbury who have looked at this. So Aspen at the top there was looking at the way that information sources around myrtle rust aligned with the values held by non-public stakeholders, and Will at the bottom there was looking at how communication and information flowed between MPI and the affected public during a couple of key responses for Queensland fruit fly and red imported fire ant there. Again, I won't go into the details because we don't have time, unfortunately. We had a psychology student also do a master's at UC, and he presented a survey to some key decision makers in the biosecurity system that allowed him to look at how they subconsciously weight different kinds of values. And he found that subconsciously these people are weighting economic values higher than anything else, and Te Ao Māori's lower than anything else. He also looked at why that is and what we can do about it. So I think that was useful work too. Tracy Godfrey here has been doing her PhD, as I mentioned, co-funded by NRT3. And she's been looking at how you create a framework for evaluating biosecurity risk that aligns with Te Ao Māori. So some of the key things that she's come up with that are different is starting from the perspective of custodianship, and particularly at the point of vulnerability, the place, so a very place-based approach to risk assessment. So thinking about one place and all the multiple threats that threaten that place, whereas currently in the system, most of those frameworks are set up for thinking about one threat affecting multiple places. So she's kind of inverting that. And a key part of this is to remove Māori from the cultural silo and make them part of the mainstream thinking in these risk decisions. A key part of this, of course, is ensuring that the decisions that we make are intergenerational. And we're going to hear some more about this from Imogen Bassett in just a moment, so I'm not going to go into this. But there are ways of evaluating risk that are more intergenerational. So I'm going to return now to our good friend William Boucher, the stripper. This story goes back to 1907 when the Mediterranean fruit fly invaded New Zealand. And this is a really bad fruit pest, and it spurred William Boucher into action. There he is, swinging his hose around in front of an audience. He went in and he did fruit stripping as well. That's where the stripper comes in. I'm sorry if your minds led you elsewhere. He stripped the fruit from local fruit trees and did some really basic biosecurity response type work, and he was successful in eradicating fruit flies from New Zealand. Since then, MPI and its predecessors have been successful at excluding further fruit flies, and we've looked at what the economic benefits of that have been. So simply in terms of access to premium markets for our kiwi fruit and apple exports, we're currently looking at around about $750 million a year that eradication was worth. So William Boucher, the stripper, has accumulated over the last 30 years or so, 50 years maybe, about $10 billion of value to our economy. That's equivalent to nearly 0.5% of our GDP. Huge. So this, and the other point to make is that these values didn't start accumulating until 50 years or more after the action. So biosecurity actions, because biosecurity problems are largely irreversible, these actions, these decisions have long-term implications. So we urge decision makers to think about the long-term implications and how the range of values that they are considering and how they communicate that, rather than trying to create a new biosecurity decision-making framework that will sit on the shelf with all the others. We have elected instead to come up with some simple tools that can slot into any framework and hope that they are useful. So I'll just finish with a very quick suggestion, which is that Treasury gets involved here and issues a $10 billion note, because this is the value that we have had from that biosecurity decision 120 years ago. And obviously on that note, you're going to put the wonderful, handsome face of New Zealand's most valuable stripper. Kia ora.
Okay, John, I didn't see that coming. Was it just me who made a correlation, stripper to Channing Tatum, but Channing Tatum would also look good on that particular note? I love it, though, and thank you to Mr. Boucher. Can we say chur, Mr. Boucher? And we've had the mana wave, we've had the kana wave. I think we should have a stripper wave. What could that look like? Wow. I was going to say he had the spray, so it just go like this. The big hose. Can I have one of those? Stripper wave? Guys, it's about the fruit. Okay? Thank you very much. Tino pai rawa atu. And you also gave us a segue. Thank you so much. Make sure you keep that enthusiasm going, because our next topic on using the risk assessment that John has talked about in her work in Auckland. Please welcome Imogen Bassett from Auckland Council. Kia ora.